Your words are failing you, not because you lack intelligence or good ideas, but because nobody ever taught you how to communicate them effectively. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone less qualified than you is getting the promotion you deserved. Someone with a weaker argument is winning the debate. Someone with less expertise is commanding the room. The only difference between you and them is not what they know, but how they communicate what they know. Sarah discovered this the hard way. She sat in the conference room, her heart sinking with every slide. Her colleague was presenting an idea to the executive team, the same idea she had suggested 3 weeks earlier, the same idea that had been dismissed when she brought it up. Now it was being celebrated as innovative and game-changing. The painful truth hit her hard. Her colleague hadn't stolen anything. Sarah had simply failed to communicate her vision in a way that made people understand its value. This wasn't the first time it had happened, and she wondered how many opportunities she had lost simply because she couldn't get her ideas across. Perhaps you've experienced a moment like this, where the gap between what you meant and what people understood felt unbridgeable. The frustration of knowing you have valuable insights, but watching them disappear into misunderstanding is one of the most isolating experiences a person can have. Here's what most people get wrong. They think communication is about being articulate or having an impressive vocabulary, some natural gift that only a few lucky people possess. The truth is that communication is the essential bridge between who you are and how the world perceives you, and it's a skill that can be learned by anyone willing to put in the work. Your success doesn't depend solely on expertise, but on your ability to convey ideas in ways that inspire action and build trust. The respect you command isn't about your title, but about the clarity and conviction with which you speak. This book is built on a simple but powerful premise. Great communication isn't about perfection or never making mistakes, but about intention, honesty, and the courage to speak even when you're afraid of being misunderstood. Over the next 10 chapters, we'll explore fundamental principles that separate mediocre communicators from exceptional ones. And these aren't theoretical concepts, but practical, actionable techniques proven through decades of research. We'll begin with active listening, because the foundation of being heard is learning to truly hear others. You'll discover why eye contact builds instant trust, the transformative power of the pause before speaking, and why simplicity makes you more persuasive. You'll learn to ask questions that open doors, see yourself as others see you, and align your body language with your words. The goal isn't to turn you into someone you're not, but to help you become the most effective version of yourself, removing barriers between your authentic thoughts and how they're received by others. Communication is your gateway to everything you want in life, and it all begins with a decision to stop accepting confusion and missed opportunities as inevitable and to start building skills that will serve you for decades to come. Chapter 1. Practice active listening. Marcus thought he was a good listener because he never interrupted people and nodded at the right moments during conversations. He was genuinely confused when his wife told him after 15 years of marriage that he never really listened to her, that their conversations felt one-sided. His defensive reaction was to list all the times he had listened and all the advice he had given, but her response stopped him cold. "That's exactly the problem, Marcus. I don't need you to solve anything. I need you to hear me." This is the paradox at the heart of why most people struggle with communication. We think listening is the passive part of conversation, the thing we do while waiting for our chance to speak, when in reality, listening is the most active and challenging component of genuine communication. True listening requires more energy and focus than speaking, because it demands that we set aside our own thoughts and create space for another person's reality to exist alongside our own. When most people listen, they're actually doing one of several things that have nothing to do with real listening at all. Some are waiting for the other person to finish so they can say what's already forming in their mind, treating the speaker's words as an inconvenient obstacle. Others listen selectively, picking out only the parts that confirm what they already believe, effectively filtering the message through their own biases. Then there are those listening with intent to fix, approaching every shared problem as a puzzle, needing their solution rather than a human experience needing acknowledgement. Active listening is something entirely different, and it begins with a fundamental shift in intention. You're not listening to reply, you're listening to understand deeply and completely. This means your primary goal isn't to formulate a clever response or find perfect advice, but to genuinely grasp what they're trying to communicate on every level, from surface words to deeper emotions underneath. The power of presence. The first requirement of active listening is presence, which sounds simple but is revolutionary in a world where conversations happen alongside a dozen distractions. Presence means putting your phone face down or in another room, closing the laptop, and giving the person in front of you the same undivided attention you'd want if you were sharing something important. It means noticing when your mind wanders and gently bringing focus back to the speaker without judgment. But presence is just the beginning, because active listening requires paying attention to far more than words being spoken. You need to tune into tone of voice, which often carries more truth than actual words, revealing whether someone is excited, anxious, or defensive, even when their words say something different. Observe body language, noticing whether posture is open or closed, whether gestures are expansive or constrained. Watch facial expressions, those micro movements that reveal emotions they might not even be aware they're feeling. One of the most powerful techniques in active listening is reflection, which means periodically summarizing what you've heard in your own words and checking whether you've understood correctly. This isn't about parroting back exactly what someone said, but capturing the essence of their message and giving them opportunity to clarify. You might say, "So what I'm hearing is that you're feeling overwhelmed by the timeline because expectations keep changing. Is that right?" This simple act shows the speaker you're genuinely trying to understand, gives them a chance to correct misunderstandings, slows down the conversation for deeper thinking, and validates their experience by demonstrating their words have landed and been taken seriously. Another crucial element is the discipline of not interrupting, which is harder than it sounds because we're eager to contribute or share our experiences. But interruptions send a clear message. What I have to say is more important than what you're saying. The foundation of all meaningful communication is making another person feel heard. And you cannot make someone feel heard if you're constantly interrupting them to share your own thoughts. Embracing silence and emotion. Active listening also means getting comfortable with silence, because silence is where real conversation often lives. When someone pauses, your instinct might be to fill that space immediately, but often what's needed is simply patience. People need time to process thoughts, find the right words, work up courage to say what they really mean. Learn to count to 5 in your head when someone stops talking before responding, and you'll be amazed at how often they start speaking again, sharing something deeper than what came before. The emotional component of active listening is equally important because people don't just want their facts heard, they want their feelings validated. This doesn't mean you have to agree with how someone feels, but it does mean acknowledging their emotions are real and legitimate. Instead of saying you shouldn't feel that way, try responses like, "That sounds really frustrating," or "I can see why that would be upsetting." This kind of emotional validation opens doors that logic and advice can never touch. One of the biggest obstacles to active listening is our own ego and our need to be right, to be the expert, to be the one with the answer. When someone shares a problem, our impulse is often to solve it because solving problems makes us feel competent. But in most cases, especially in personal relationships, people aren't looking for solutions. They're looking for connection and the relief that comes from being truly heard. Active listening isn't something you master in a week because it requires rewiring habits developed your entire life. Start small. Choose one conversation each day where you commit to practicing at the highest level. Put away all distractions. Focus completely on the speaker. Use reflection to check understanding. Avoid interrupting, and validate emotions without judgment. Pay attention to what happens compared to your usual interactions, and you'll notice conversations go deeper, faster. People seem more relaxed and open, and the quality of information you receive improves dramatically. Remember that every expert listener started exactly where you are now, struggling to stay focused and fighting the urge to interrupt. The difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't talent. It's simply the accumulation of thousands of small moments where you chose to truly listen instead of just waiting to talk. Start with one conversation today. Bring your full presence and attention, and notice what opens up when you give someone the rare gift of being completely heard. Chapter 2. Maintain eye contact. Jennifer had always been told she was intelligent and capable, yet she constantly struggled to be taken seriously in meetings at her tech company. Her ideas were often overlooked, and colleagues would sometimes repeat her suggestions minutes later as if they were their own. A mentor finally pulled her aside and asked a simple question. "Do you notice that you look at your notes or the table whenever you're speaking?" Jennifer hadn't noticed, but once it was pointed out, she realized she had been unconsciously avoiding eye contact her entire professional life, and this silent habit was undermining everything she said. Eye contact is one of the most powerful yet underutilized tools in human communication, a silent force that can build instant connection and trust or create distance and suspicion in mere seconds. When you look someone in the eyes while speaking or listening, you're sending a message that transcends words. I see you, I respect you, what you're saying matters to me, and I'm confident enough in myself to meet your gaze without flinching. Conversely, when you avoid eye contact, you're inadvertently communicating uncertainty, disinterest, dishonesty, or discomfort, regardless of how carefully you've chosen your words. The science behind eye contact reveals why it carries such weight in our interactions. When two people make eye contact, their brains release oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, which creates feelings of trust and connection. This is the same chemical released between mothers and infants during bonding, and it's triggered simply by looking into another person's eyes. Research shows that people who maintain appropriate eye contact are perceived as more confident, more competent, more trustworthy, and more likable than those who don't, even when saying the exact same words. However, eye contact is not about staring intensely at someone without blinking, which can feel aggressive or uncomfortable, creating the opposite effect you're trying to achieve. The key is finding a natural balance, what communication experts often describe as the 50 to 70% rule. During conversation, aim to maintain eye contact about 50 to 70% of the time, looking away occasionally to think or to give the other person space, then naturally returning your gaze to theirs. The art of natural connection. When you're listening, maintaining eye contact should be even more consistent, somewhere closer to 70 to 80% of the time, because this demonstrates that you're fully engaged with what the other person is saying. Your eyes should communicate genuine interest and attention, not wandering around the room, or dropping to your phone, or constantly checking over the speaker's shoulder to see who else is nearby. When you're speaking, it's natural to look away slightly more often as you gather your thoughts, but you should regularly return to making eye contact to ensure your words are landing and to gauge the listener's reaction. One common mistake people make is looking at just one eye or looking at the bridge of someone's nose instead of their eyes, thinking this will be less intense or easier to maintain. While this might feel more comfortable for you, it actually creates a subtle disconnect because the other person can sense something is off, even if they can't articulate what it is. Instead, practice looking at both eyes in a soft, natural way. Or if that feels too intense, you can look at the space between their eyes or gently shift your gaze from one eye to the other in a relaxed pattern. Cultural context matters significantly when it comes to eye contact because norms vary dramatically across different cultures and contexts. In many Western cultures, direct eye contact is expected and valued as a sign of honesty and engagement. But in some Asian, African, and Latin American cultures, prolonged eye contact can be seen as disrespectful or aggressive, especially when directed at elders or authority figures. If you're communicating across cultures, it's worth researching or observing the eye contact norms of that culture to avoid unintentionally causing offense or discomfort. For many people, maintaining eye contact doesn't come naturally and can feel deeply uncomfortable, especially if you grew up in an environment where direct eye contact was discouraged, or if you struggle with social anxiety or conditions like autism that make eye contact physically or emotionally challenging. If this describes you, know that eye contact is a skill that can be developed gradually with practice, and small improvements can make a significant difference in how you're perceived. Eye contact is the bridge between isolation and connection, the silent affirmation that says you matter enough for me to truly see you. Building comfort and confidence. Start by practicing with people you feel safe with, perhaps close friends or family members, consciously maintaining eye contact for slightly longer than feels comfortable and gradually building your tolerance. You can also practice with yourself in a mirror, which sounds strange, but actually helps you become more comfortable with the experience of sustained eye contact. Another technique is to focus on noticing eye color during conversations, which naturally keeps your gaze on the other person's eyes while giving your mind a task that reduces self-consciousness. In professional settings, eye contact becomes even more critical because it directly impacts how your competence and authority are perceived. When presenting to a group, make eye contact with different individuals throughout the room rather than staring at one person or looking over everyone's heads. Hold each person's gaze for 3 to 5 seconds before moving to someone else, which creates the feeling that you're having individual conversations within the larger presentation. When negotiating or discussing important matters, maintaining steady eye contact shows you're confident in your position and helps you read the other person's reactions and unspoken responses. During difficult conversations, when emotions are running high and the temptation to look away is strongest, eye contact becomes most important. Looking someone in the eyes when delivering hard news, offering an apology, or standing firm on a boundary communicates that you're taking full responsibility for your words and that you respect them enough to be fully present for their reaction. Breaking eye contact during these critical moments can make you seem evasive, insincere, or uncomfortable with the truth of what you're saying. One practical exercise is to become aware of your current eye contact patterns by asking trusted colleagues or friends to observe you during conversations and give you honest feedback. Do you tend to look away when you're thinking, when you're nervous, or when discussing certain topics? Do you maintain eye contact when listening, but not when speaking, or vice versa? Understanding your specific patterns helps you know what to work on. Remember that the goal of eye contact isn't to make others uncomfortable or to force intimacy where it isn't wanted, but rather to create genuine connection and demonstrate respect and confidence. When done naturally and appropriately, eye contact transforms ordinary conversations into moments of real, human connection, making people feel valued, seen, and understood in a way that words alone can never achieve. Start paying attention to eye contact in your very next conversation, and notice how such a simple shift in where you direct your gaze can fundamentally change the quality of your interactions. Chapter 3. Think before you speak. David's career nearly ended over 7 words spoken in anger during a team meeting. His colleague had criticized his project approach in front of the entire department, and without thinking, David responded with a sarcastic comment that attacked his colleague's competence and work ethic. The room went silent. His manager's face hardened. And in that moment, David would have given anything to take back those 7 words that had flown out of his mouth before his brain had a chance to catch up. The apology he offered later couldn't undo the damage to his professional reputation or the relationship with his colleague, all because he had failed to pause before speaking. In a world that values quick responses and celebrates people who think on their feet, the idea of pausing before you speak might seem counterintuitive or even weak. We're conditioned to believe that hesitation signals uncertainty, that the person who speaks first and fastest wins the conversation, and that taking time to think makes you appear slow or unprepared. This couldn't be further from the truth, because the pause before speaking is actually where wisdom lives, where emotional reactions are filtered through rational thought, and where the difference between words you'll be proud of and words you'll regret is determined. The human brain processes information remarkably quickly, generating emotional responses and verbal reactions in milliseconds. But this speed is not always our friend in communication. Our immediate reactions are often driven by emotion rather than reason, by defensiveness rather than curiosity, by the need to be right rather than the desire to understand. When someone says something that triggers us, whether it's criticism, disagreement, or something that touches a sensitive area, our brain's threat response activates, and we're flooded with the impulse to defend, attack, or flee, and none of these impulses lead to effective communication. Taking even a few seconds to pause before responding gives your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought and impulse control, time to catch up with your emotional limbic system. In that brief pause, you can ask yourself critical questions. What am I really trying to communicate here? Is what I'm about to say going to move this conversation forward or escalate the conflict? Am I responding to what was actually said or to what I assumed was meant? Will I be proud of these words tomorrow, next week, next year? The practice of intentional speech. The pause doesn't have to be long or awkward. 3 to 5 seconds is often enough to transform your response from reactive to intentional, from impulsive to considered. During this pause, you can take a breath, which has the added benefit of calming your nervous system and reducing the intensity of emotional reactions. You can organize your thoughts, deciding what's most important to convey and the clearest way to express it. You can consider your audience and adjust your message to what they need to hear, rather than just what you want to say. In high-stakes conversations like negotiations, difficult feedback sessions, or conflicts with people you care about, extending this pause even further can be valuable. It's perfectly acceptable to say things like, "That's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment." Or, "I want to give you a thoughtful response, so give me a second to gather my thoughts." Far from making you appear incompetent, This kind of deliberate thinking signals that you take the conversation seriously, that you respect the other person enough to give them your best thinking rather than your first reaction, and that you have the confidence to prioritize clarity over speed. The pause is particularly crucial when emotions are running high, because emotional arousal narrows our thinking and makes us more likely to say things we don't mean or express ourselves in ways that damage relationships. If you notice your heart racing, your face flushing, or your voice rising, these are signals that you need to pause longer than usual, perhaps even suggesting that you table the conversation until you've had time to calm down and think through what you really want to communicate. One practical technique for building the pause habit is the mental outline method, where you quickly structure your thoughts before speaking. Ask yourself, what's my main point? What supporting evidence or examples do I want to include? What response am I hoping for from the other person? This mental organization takes only a few seconds, but dramatically improves the clarity and impact of what you say. Your words become more coherent, your arguments more persuasive, and your communication more effective because you're speaking with intention rather than improvising as you go. The space between stimulus and response is where your power lives, and in that space lies your freedom to choose words that build rather than destroy, that clarify rather than confuse, that heal rather than harm. Managing regret and building wisdom. Another benefit of thinking before speaking is that it helps you avoid the exhausting cycle of speaking impulsively and then spending hours or days dealing with the fallout. How much time have you spent replaying conversations in your mind, wishing you had said something differently, sending apology texts or emails, or doing damage control because you spoke without thinking? All of that energy could be redirected toward positive goals if you simply gave yourself permission to pause before responding. This doesn't mean you should overthink every word or become so cautious that you never speak spontaneously. In casual, low-stakes conversations with people you trust, it's fine to let your thoughts flow freely without extensive filtering. The key is developing the awareness to recognize when you're in a situation that requires more careful consideration and having the discipline to slow down in those moments. Over time, this becomes automatic, where you naturally pause in important conversations without having to consciously remind yourself. Start practicing the pause today in your everyday conversations. Before responding to emails, texts, or messages, read them twice and wait 30 seconds before hitting send. In face-to-face conversations, practice counting to 3 in your head before answering questions. Notice how this simple shift changes not just what you say, but how people respond to you. You'll find that your words carry more weight, that people take you more seriously, and that you spend far less time regretting what came out of your mouth. The most successful communicators understand that thinking before speaking isn't a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of strength, maturity, and respect for both yourself and others. They know that the goal isn't to have the fastest comeback or the quickest response, but to have the most thoughtful, clear, and effective communication. By building the habit of pausing before you speak, you're choosing to be someone whose words matter, whose opinions are valued, and whose communication builds bridges instead of burning them. Chapter 4. Use simple words. Rebecca was proud of her master's degree in business analytics and wanted everyone to know it. So whenever she presented her findings to the marketing team, she filled her presentations with terms like multivariate regression analysis, heteroscedastic variance, and algorithmic optimization paradigms. She noticed that people's eyes glazed over during her presentations, that her recommendations were rarely implemented, and that her colleague James, who had less education and experience, somehow had more influence despite using much simpler language. It took her manager's blunt feedback to realize that her complex vocabulary wasn't making her sound smarter. It was making her impossible to understand. And in business, if people don't understand you, they won't follow you. There's a persistent myth in our culture that using complicated language makes you appear more intelligent, more educated, more worthy of respect. We see it in academic papers filled with jargon that could easily be expressed in plain English, in business presentations loaded with buzzwords and corporate speak, in people who use five-syllable words when two-syllable words would communicate the same idea more clearly. This myth is not only wrong, it's actively harmful to effective communication, because the true measure of intelligence isn't how complex you can make something sound, but how simply you can explain complex ideas so that anyone can grasp them. Albert Einstein once said that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough, and this insight cuts to the heart of why simplicity is so powerful. When you truly understand a concept, you can strip away the unnecessary complexity and get to the essential truth underneath, expressing it in language that respects your audience's time and intelligence rather than trying to impress them with vocabulary. The greatest communicators in history, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Steve Jobs, built their influence not on complicated rhetoric, but on simple, clear, memorable language that anyone could understand and repeat. Using simple words doesn't mean dumbing down your ideas or talking down to your audience. It means respecting them enough to make your message accessible, to remove the barriers between your thoughts and their understanding. It means choosing clarity over cleverness, precision over pretension, and connection over showing off. When you use straightforward language, you're inviting people into your thinking rather than excluding them with walls of jargon and complexity that serve no purpose except to make you feel superior. The power of clarity. Consider the difference between these two ways of expressing the same idea. Version 1. We need to leverage our core competencies to optimize our go-to-market strategy and achieve synergistic outcomes across our customer touchpoints. Version 2. We need to use our strengths to reach customers more effectively. Both sentences convey essentially the same meaning, but the second one is clearer, shorter, and far more likely to be understood and remembered. The first version might make the speaker feel important, but it creates confusion and requires listeners to work harder to decode the message. The challenge many people face is that they've been conditioned to believe that simple language lacks sophistication or professionalism. In academic settings, students are often rewarded for using complex terminology even when simpler alternatives exist. In corporate environments, people adopt jargon-heavy language to fit in or to sound like they belong. In professional circles, there's often an unspoken pressure to use industry-specific terms to demonstrate expertise. But true expertise is demonstrated not by how many technical terms you know, but by your ability to make complex ideas understandable to people outside your field. One practical approach to simplifying your language is the grandmother test, which asks a simple question. Could you explain this concept to your grandmother or to a bright 12-year-old and have them understand it? If not, your language is probably too complex. This doesn't mean your grandmother or a 12-year-old is your actual audience, but using them as a mental benchmark helps you identify where you're relying on jargon or unnecessarily complicated phrasing instead of clear, direct communication. Another powerful technique is the use of concrete examples, analogies, and metaphors to illustrate abstract or complex ideas. Instead of talking about optimizing operational efficiency, you might say, it's like cleaning out your garage so you can actually find your tools when you need them. Instead of discussing stakeholder alignment, you could say, making sure everyone on the team is rowing in the same direction. These comparisons take abstract business concepts and ground them in relatable, everyday experiences that anyone can visualize and understand. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and the person who can make the complex simple wields far more influence than the person who makes the simple complex. Building trust through accessibility. The relationship between simple language and trust is direct and powerful. When you speak in ways people can easily understand, they trust you more because there's no hidden meaning to decode, no sense that you're trying to confuse them or hide behind fancy words. They feel respected because you've taken the time to translate your expertise into language that meets them where they are. They're more likely to ask questions, engage with your ideas, and ultimately take action based on what you've communicated because they genuinely understand what you're asking of them. This principle applies across every context where communication matters. Teachers who explain complex subjects using simple language and relatable examples have students who actually learn and retain the material. Leaders who articulate their vision in clear, straightforward terms inspire followers who know exactly what they're working toward. Salespeople who describe their products without resorting to technical jargon make it easy for customers to say yes. Doctors who explain medical conditions and treatment options in plain English have patients who are more likely to follow their advice and have better health outcomes. To start simplifying your language today, begin by identifying the jargon and complex terms you use most frequently in your speaking and writing. For each one, ask yourself, is there a simpler way to say this? Can I use a common word instead of a technical term without losing meaning? Would someone outside my field or industry understand what I'm talking about? Then make a conscious effort to replace complex language with simpler alternatives and pay attention to how people respond. You'll likely notice that conversations flow more smoothly, that people engage more readily with your ideas, and that your influence grows not in spite of your simpler language, but because of it. Remember that choosing simple words is not about limiting your vocabulary or constraining your thinking, but about prioritizing understanding over ego, connection over impression, and impact over appearance. The most powerful communicators know that their job isn't to sound smart, it's to be understood, and they choose every word with that goal in mind. Start today by committing to clarity, and watch as your ability to influence, persuade, and connect with others grows exponentially. Chapter 5. Ask open-ended questions. Michael considered himself a great conversationalist because he could talk to anyone about anything, but he never understood why people seemed to lose interest in conversations with him after a few minutes. His dates rarely led to second dates, his networking efforts yielded few meaningful connections, and colleagues seemed to avoid small talk with him in the office kitchen. A friend finally pointed out the pattern. Michael asked questions like, "Did you have a good weekend?" and "Do you like your job?" which could be answered with a simple yes or no, effectively killing the conversation before it had a chance to develop into anything meaningful or memorable. The difference between closed questions and open-ended questions is the difference between a door that slams shut and a door that swings wide open, inviting you into deeper territory. Closed questions, those that can be answered with yes, no, or a single word, are conversation stoppers that put all the burden back on you to keep things moving. Open-ended questions, those that begin with how, what, why, tell me about, or describe, are conversation starters that invite the other person to share their thoughts, feelings, experiences, and perspectives in ways that create genuine connection and understanding. When you ask someone, "Did you enjoy the conference?" you're likely to get yes or "It was okay," and then you're stuck trying to come up with another question to keep the conversation alive. But when you ask, "What was the most interesting thing you learned at the conference?" you've opened a door for them to share specific insights, to tell stories, to reveal what matters to them. The first question treats conversation like an interrogation, a series of yes or no inquiries that feel more like a checklist than genuine interest. The second question treats conversation like an exploration, where you're genuinely curious about the other person's inner world. The psychology behind why open-ended questions work so well is straightforward. People love talking about themselves, their experiences, their opinions, and their perspectives, especially when someone seems genuinely interested in hearing them. When you ask thoughtful, open-ended questions, you're essentially giving someone the gift of being seen and heard, and most people will respond by opening up, sharing more, and feeling more positively toward you. You're also learning exponentially more about the person than you would through a series of yes or no questions, gaining insights into how they think, what they value, and what drives them. The art of genuine curiosity. Open-ended questions shift the focus of the conversation from you to the other person, which might seem counterintuitive if you're trying to make a good impression or build a relationship. But the paradox of conversation is that the less you talk about yourself and the more you invite others to share, the more they enjoy the interaction and the more highly they think of you. People remember how you made them feel far more than they remember what you said, and asking thoughtful questions that allow them to express themselves makes them feel valued, interesting, and understood. The key to asking great open-ended questions is genuine curiosity rather than following a script or using questions as a technique to manipulate the conversation. When you're authentically interested in understanding someone's perspective, your questions naturally become more open-ended because you want to hear their full thoughts, not just a yes or no confirmation of your assumptions. This curiosity shows in your tone, your body language, and your follow-up questions, creating a sense of authentic connection rather than a performative interview. Consider the difference in these question pairs. Instead of, "Are you happy with your career?" ask, "What do you love most about your work?" Or, "What led you to choose this career path?" Instead of, "Did you like the presentation?" ask, "What stood out to you in the presentation?" Or, "How do you think we could apply those ideas to our project?" Instead of, "Is your family important to you?" ask, "Tell me about your family." Or, "What traditions does your family value most?" Notice how the open-ended versions invite stories, opinions, and deeper sharing rather than one-word responses. One common mistake people make is asking pseudo-open-ended questions that are actually closed questions in disguise. For example, "Don't you think the economy is getting worse?" Sounds like it's inviting discussion, but it's actually leading the person toward a yes or no answer that agrees with your premise. True open-ended questions don't have a right answer embedded in them and don't push the person toward a particular response. They're genuinely curious inquiries like, "How do you think the current economy is affecting small businesses?" that allow the person to form and express their own perspective. The quality of your relationships is directly proportional to the quality of the questions you ask, because great questions open doors, while poor questions keep them closed. Building connection through inquiry. Another powerful aspect of open-ended questions is that they demonstrate emotional intelligence and empathy, showing that you care about understanding the other person's experience rather than just gathering facts. Questions like, "How did that make you feel?" Or, "What was going through your mind when that happened?" Or, "What matters most to you about this situation?" Invite people to share their emotional reality, not just the surface details, creating intimacy and trust that closed questions can never achieve. In professional settings, open-ended questions are equally valuable for collaboration, problem-solving, and leadership. Instead of asking your team, "Does everyone understand the plan?" which will likely get obligatory nods even if people are confused, ask, "What questions do you have about the plan?" Or, "How do you see this working in practice?" These questions invite real engagement and reveal potential issues before they become problems. When receiving feedback, instead of asking, "Was my presentation okay?" ask, "What could I have done to make the presentation more effective?" which gives people permission to share constructive insights. The art of follow-up questions is where open-ended questioning really shines, because it shows you're not just going through the motions, but genuinely listening and building on what the person has shared. When someone answers your question, resist the urge to immediately share your own related story or move to a new topic. Instead, dig deeper with questions like, "Tell me more about that," or "What happened next?" or "Why do you think that is?" These simple follow-ups communicate that you're truly interested and create space for the person to explore their thoughts more fully. To start improving your questioning skills today, pay attention to how many of your questions can be answered with yes or no, and challenge yourself to rephrase them as open-ended alternatives. Before asking a question, pause and consider. Am I asking this to gather specific information, or am I asking this to understand the person's perspective and experience? If it's the latter, make sure your question invites more than a one-word response. Practice in low-stakes situations like casual conversations with friends or family, and notice how the quality of your interactions improves when you give people permission to really share. Start each conversation with a genuine desire to understand the other person rather than to be understood, and let your questions flow from that curiosity. Ask about their experiences, their opinions, their stories, and their perspectives, and then listen carefully to their answers without immediately jumping to your own agenda. You'll find that conversations become richer, relationships deepen faster, and people seek you out, not because you're the most interesting person they know, but because you make them feel interesting, valued, and truly heard. Remember that the best conversationalists aren't the best talkers. They're the best question askers, the people who know how to draw others out and create space for meaningful exchange. By mastering the art of open-ended questions, you're not just improving your conversation skills, you're building genuine connections that can transform both your personal and professional life. Chapter 6. Record Yourself. Speaking. Lisa had been giving presentations for 5 years and thought she was pretty good at it until her company started recording training sessions for review. When she watched herself on video for the first time, she was horrified by what she saw and heard. She said and like constantly, at least 3 or 4 times per minute. Her voice was monotone and lacked energy. She spoke so quickly that important points rushed past without emphasis. She had no idea she had these habits because when you're speaking, it's nearly impossible to hear yourself objectively. But the camera doesn't lie. Recording yourself speaking is one of the most uncomfortable but effective tools for improving communication because it reveals the gap between how you think you sound and how you actually come across to others. Most people avoid this practice precisely because it's so uncomfortable, cringing at the sound of their own voice and feeling embarrassed by their verbal tics and awkward phrasing. But this discomfort is exactly why recording yourself is so valuable, because facing the reality of your communication habits is the fastest route to meaningful improvement. When you record yourself, you want to listen for several specific elements that are difficult to monitor in real time. Pay attention to your pace and whether you're speaking too quickly, which makes you hard to follow, or too slowly, which can lose people's attention. Notice your use of filler words like uh, like, you know, and sort of, which undermine your credibility and make you sound uncertain even when you're not. Listen to your vocal variety and whether your tone rises and falls naturally to emphasize important points or remains flat and monotone throughout. Check for clarity in your pronunciation and articulation, listening for whether you're mumbling, dropping the ends of words, or rushing through syllables in ways that make you difficult to understand. Notice your volume and whether you're speaking loudly enough to be heard clearly without shouting. Pay attention to the organization of your thoughts and whether your points flow logically or jump around in confusing ways. Listen for moments where you seem to lose your train of thought or struggle to find the right words. Turning awareness into action. The process of recording yourself doesn't require expensive equipment or complicated setups. Your smartphone has everything you need to capture audio or video of yourself speaking. Start with simple exercises like reading a passage from a book aloud for 3 to 5 minutes, or recording yourself explaining a concept you know well, or practicing a presentation you need to give. The key is to create recordings regularly, at least once a week, so you can track your progress over time and see how your habits are changing. When you first listen to your recordings, resist the urge to focus only on what's wrong or to be overly critical of yourself. Yes, you'll notice areas for improvement, but also acknowledge what you're doing well, whether that's good eye contact if you're recording video, strong opening statements, or clear explanations of complex ideas. This balanced approach prevents the practice from becoming so discouraging that you abandon it altogether. Create a simple system for tracking your most common issues and monitoring improvement. You might keep a journal where you note how many filler words you used in a 3-minute recording, or how many times you lost your train of thought, or specific phrases you want to eliminate. Over weeks and months, you'll be able to see concrete evidence of your progress, which provides motivation to continue the practice even when it feels uncomfortable. You cannot fix what you cannot see, and recording yourself speaking is the mirror that reveals the truth of how others experience your communication. One powerful variation is to record yourself in actual conversations or presentations with permission from others involved, because this captures your real communication patterns rather than the more controlled version that emerges when you're consciously practicing. You'll often discover that your habits are different in spontaneous conversation than in prepared speech, and both types of recordings provide valuable insights. As you become more comfortable with the practice, start comparing your recordings to speakers you admire. Listen to how they pace their speech, where they pause for emphasis, how they modulate their tone to maintain interest, and how they articulate clearly without sounding overly formal. You're not trying to copy them exactly, but rather to learn from their techniques and adapt them to your own authentic style. Remember that the goal isn't perfection or to eliminate every single filler word and verbal quirk. Some personality in your speech patterns is good and makes you sound human and relatable. The goal is to become aware of habits that undermine your message and to reduce them to the point where they're not distracting. Start recording yourself this week, face the discomfort head-on, and commit to the practice for at least 30 days. You'll be amazed at how much your communication improves when you finally see and hear yourself the way others do. Chapter 7. Improve Body Language. During a job interview, Rachel gave all the right answers to every question. Her resume was impressive, and her qualifications were perfect for the role. Yet she didn't get the job, and the feedback she received was vague. "We just didn't feel like you were enthusiastic about the opportunity." Rachel was confused because she had been very enthusiastic, but what she didn't realize was that her body language had told a completely different story. Her crossed arms, slouched posture, and minimal facial expressions had communicated disinterest and discomfort, contradicting every word that came out of her mouth. Research shows that nonverbal communication accounts for a significant portion of how your message is received, often carrying more weight than the actual words you speak. When your body language contradicts your verbal message, people almost always believe the nonverbal signals because they're harder to fake and come across as more authentic. If you say you're confident while hunching your shoulders and avoiding eye contact, or claim to be open to feedback while crossing your arms and frowning, your body is undermining everything your mouth is trying to accomplish. Effective body language begins with posture. Stand or sit with your spine straight but not rigid, shoulders back and relaxed, taking up appropriate space without being aggressive. Open posture, meaning your arms are uncrossed and your body is oriented toward the person you're speaking with, signals receptiveness and confidence. Closed posture, like crossed arms, hunched shoulders, or turning your body away, creates barriers and suggests defensiveness or discomfort, even when that's not your intention. Aligning body and message. Your gestures should support and emphasize your words rather than distracting from them. Use purposeful hand movements to illustrate points, indicate size or direction, or add emphasis to important ideas. Avoid nervous gestures like fidgeting with pens, touching your face repeatedly, or excessive hand movements that draw attention away from your message. The goal is natural movement that reinforces what you're saying without becoming the focus of attention. Facial expressions are equally important, especially in conveying genuine interest and emotion. Your face should match the tone of the conversation, showing warmth and engagement in friendly discussions, concern during serious topics, and enthusiasm when appropriate. A blank or neutral expression can make you seem disconnected or uninterested, even when you're fully engaged mentally. Practice being aware of your resting face and consciously softening your expression to appear more approachable. Start improving your body language by recording yourself on video during conversations or presentations, watching specifically for your posture, gestures, and facial expressions. Ask trusted friends or colleagues for honest feedback about your nonverbal communication. Make small adjustments one at a time, perhaps focusing on posture this week, gestures next week, and facial expressions the following week. When your body language aligns with your words, your entire message becomes more powerful, credible, and persuasive. Chapter 8. Read aloud. Daily. James had always been a voracious reader, consuming dozens of books each year, but he noticed that whenever he had to speak in meetings or give presentations, he would stumble over words, his voice would crack, and he'd lose his breath mid-sentence. A speech coach explained that reading silently and speaking aloud use completely different muscle groups and neural pathways, which meant that despite all his reading, James had never actually trained the physical mechanics of clear, confident speech. His vocal cords, tongue, lips, and breathing muscles needed the same kind of regular exercise that any other skill requires. Reading aloud daily is one of the simplest yet most overlooked practices for improving your speaking ability, because it conditions your voice and articulation muscles through consistent, deliberate practice. When you read silently, your brain processes the words, but your mouth doesn't move, your vocal cords don't vibrate, and you don't practice the coordination required to produce clear, well-paced speech. Reading aloud forces you to engage all the physical components of speaking, building strength, endurance, and control that translate directly to better communication. The practice doesn't require hours of time or special materials. 15 to 20 minutes each day is enough to make significant improvements in your vocal quality, pronunciation, and confidence. You can read anything that interests you: novels, news articles, poetry, technical documents, or even scripts and plays. The key is to read with intention, focusing on clear pronunciation of each word, appropriate pacing that allows you to breathe naturally, and vocal variety that brings the text to life rather than reading in a flat monotone. Building vocal strength and control. As you read aloud, pay attention to your breathing and make sure you're taking full breaths from your diaphragm rather than shallow chest breaths. Proper breath support is the foundation of strong, clear speech, and reading aloud is an excellent way to develop this habit. Notice where natural pauses occur in the text and use them to breathe rather than running out of air mid-sentence and having to gasp awkwardly. Focus on articulation by overpronouncing words slightly at first, making sure you're hitting all the consonants and not dropping the ends of words. This might feel exaggerated initially, but it trains your mouth to move more precisely, which results in clearer speech even when you return to your normal speaking patterns. Pay special attention to difficult word combinations or sounds that you tend to stumble over, practicing them repeatedly until they flow smoothly. Experiment with vocal variety by changing your pitch, volume, and pace to match the content you're reading. If you're reading dialogue, try giving different characters distinct voices. If you're reading persuasive text, emphasize key points with changes in tone or volume. This playfulness helps you develop greater control over your vocal range and makes your everyday speech more engaging and dynamic. Recording your reading sessions allows you to hear your progress over time and identify specific areas that need work. You might notice that you rush through certain sections, that your volume drops at the end of sentences, or that you have particular sounds or word types that give you trouble. This awareness lets you focus your practice on areas that will yield the greatest improvement. The benefits of daily reading aloud extend beyond just vocal mechanics. It builds confidence in your natural speaking voice, reduces anxiety about public speaking, improves your vocabulary as you encounter and pronounce new words, and even enhances your comprehension and retention of what you read. Make it part of your morning routine or evening wind-down. Treat it as training for one of your most important tools, and watch as your speaking clarity, confidence, and presence grow stronger with each passing week. Chapter 9. Expand your vocabulary. Through reading. Amanda felt frustrated during team meetings because she could see complex problems clearly in her mind, but couldn't find the right words to express her insights. She'd stumble through explanations, using vague terms like thing and stuff and kind of like, watching as colleagues lost interest or misunderstood her points entirely. Her manager suggested she start reading more widely, explaining that a limited vocabulary was like trying to paint a detailed picture with only 3 colors. You can create something, but it will never have the richness and precision that a full palette provides. Your vocabulary is the toolbox you use to construct meaning, express nuance, and convey ideas with precision. And like any toolbox, its usefulness depends on how many tools it contains and how well you know how to use them. A rich vocabulary allows you to choose exactly the right word for what you want to say, capturing subtle distinctions between similar concepts and painting vivid pictures with language. A limited vocabulary forces you to settle for approximations, using general words when specific ones would be more powerful, and leaving your listeners to fill in the gaps of what you're trying to communicate. The most effective way to expand your vocabulary naturally is through consistent reading of high-quality material that exposes you to words used in context. Unlike memorizing word lists or studying vocabulary flashcards, which often results in knowing definitions without understanding usage, reading shows you how words function in real sentences, what shades of meaning they carry, and what contexts they're appropriate for. When you encounter a new word while reading, you absorb not just its meaning, but its connotations, its formality level, and the company it keeps. Building your word bank. Read widely across different genres and subjects to encounter the broadest range of vocabulary. Fiction introduces you to descriptive language and dialogue, helping you express emotions and paint scenes with words. Nonfiction exposes you to domain-specific terminology and precise analytical language. News articles teach you contemporary usage and how language evolves. Essays and opinion pieces show you persuasive language and rhetorical techniques. Each genre contributes different tools to your vocabulary toolkit. When you encounter an unfamiliar word while reading, resist the urge to skip over it or make a vague guess at its meaning. Take a moment to look it up, understand its definition, and see how it's being used in the sentence. Better yet, keep a vocabulary journal where you write down new words along with the sentence you found them in and your own example sentence using the word. This active engagement helps cement the word in your memory far more effectively than passive exposure. The goal isn't to use complicated words to sound impressive, but to have the precise word available when you need it. Sometimes the right word is simple and common, and sometimes it's more specific or technical. A rich vocabulary gives you options, allowing you to choose language that's appropriate for your audience and purpose. You might use technical terminology when speaking with colleagues in your field, but switch to simpler synonyms when explaining the same concept to someone outside your industry. Practice using new words in conversation and writing as soon as possible after learning them, because words you don't use regularly will fade from your active vocabulary even if you recognize them when reading. Challenge yourself to incorporate 1 or 2 new words each week into your everyday communication, choosing words that fill genuine gaps in your current vocabulary rather than obscure terms you'll rarely need. A growing vocabulary doesn't just improve how you express yourself, it also enhances how you think. Having more words at your disposal allows you to make finer distinctions in your own mind, to think more precisely about complex issues, and to notice subtleties you might have missed with a more limited linguistic toolkit. The relationship between language and thought is bidirectional, each enriching the other as your vocabulary expands. Start today by committing to read for at least 20 to 30 minutes daily, choosing material slightly above your current reading level to ensure you're encountering new words regularly. Keep a notebook or digital document for vocabulary building and review it weekly to reinforce your learning. Within months, you'll notice that expressing yourself becomes easier, your communication becomes more precise and vivid, and people respond more positively to your ideas because you're able to articulate them with greater clarity and impact. Chapter 10. Seek feedback regularly. For 3 years, Tom thought he was doing an excellent job leading his team, and he was genuinely shocked when his annual review revealed that his communication style was creating problems. His team members felt he was dismissive of their ideas, that he interrupted constantly, and that he never seemed to truly listen to their concerns. Tom had no idea any of this was happening because nobody had ever told him directly, and he had never thought to ask. His communication blind spots had been damaging relationships and limiting his effectiveness for years, and he'd been completely unaware because he'd never sought honest feedback. The uncomfortable truth about improving communication is that you cannot see your own blind spots, those habits and patterns that are obvious to everyone else but invisible to you. You might think you're being clear when you're actually confusing people, believe you're being friendly when you're coming across as condescending, or assume you're listening well when you're constantly interrupting. Without external input, you'll keep making the same mistakes repeatedly, never understanding why your communication isn't as effective as you'd like it to be. Seeking feedback regularly is the most direct path to identifying and correcting these blind spots, but it requires courage and humility that many people struggle to muster. Nobody likes hearing criticism, and our natural instinct is to defend ourselves, make excuses, or dismiss feedback that doesn't align with our self-image. But growth only happens when you're willing to set aside your ego, acknowledge that others might see things you can't, and use their perspectives to become better at what you do. Creating a feedback culture. The key to getting useful feedback is being specific about what you're asking for, rather than posing vague questions like, "How did I do?" which usually generates equally vague responses like, "You did great." Instead, ask targeted questions. Did I explain that concept clearly, or were there parts that confused you? Was I speaking too quickly, or was the pace appropriate? Did you feel like I was listening to your concerns, or did I seem distracted? Specific questions make it easier for people to give you actionable insights rather than generic praise or criticism. Choose the right people to ask for feedback, ideally those who interact with you regularly in different contexts and who have demonstrated good judgment and honesty in the past. This might include trusted colleagues, your manager, close friends who will be direct with you, or even family members who see you in unguarded moments. Let them know you're genuinely working on improving your communication and that you value honest feedback, even if it's uncomfortable to hear. When you receive feedback, your only job in that moment is to listen and understand, not to defend, explain, or justify your actions. Thank the person for their honesty, ask clarifying questions if you need more specific examples, and resist the urge to argue about whether their perception is accurate. Remember that perception is reality in communication. If someone misunderstood you or was put off by your tone, that's valuable information regardless of what you intended. Create a system for implementing feedback rather than just collecting it and forgetting about it. After receiving feedback, identify one or two specific behaviors you want to change and focus on those for several weeks before adding more. You might decide to work on interrupting less, using more open-ended questions, or improving your eye contact during difficult conversations. Track your progress and follow up with the people who gave you feedback to see if they've noticed improvements. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, and those who actively seek it grow faster than those who wait for it to find them. Make feedback seeking a regular habit rather than a one-time event. Schedule quarterly conversations specifically to ask for communication feedback. Create informal opportunities to check in after important presentations or meetings, and develop relationships where honest feedback flows naturally in both directions. The more normal feedback becomes, the less threatening it feels, and the more valuable it becomes as a tool for continuous improvement. Remember that seeking feedback is a sign of strength and self-awareness, not weakness. It demonstrates that you care enough about your effectiveness and your relationships to be willing to hear hard truths and make changes. The people who grow the fastest are those who actively pursue feedback, implement it thoughtfully, and circle back to confirm that their changes are making a positive difference. Start today by identifying 3 people whose opinion you trust and asking them one specific question about your communication. Listen to their answers without defensiveness, thank them sincerely, and commit to making at least one change based on what you learn. Conclusion: your communication journey begins now. You've now explored 10 fundamental principles that separate mediocre communicators from exceptional ones. And if you're feeling somewhat overwhelmed by everything you've learned, that's completely normal. The path to communication mastery isn't about implementing all 10 principles perfectly starting tomorrow, but about recognizing that small, consistent improvements compound over time into transformational results. Every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every interaction a chance to refine your skills. And every day brings new moments where you can choose to communicate with greater intention and effectiveness. Think back to where we started with Sarah in that conference room, watching someone else present her idea because she hadn't been able to communicate its value effectively. That story could be anyone's story, and perhaps it's been yours at times. But it doesn't have to be your future, because now you understand that communication isn't a mysterious talent bestowed on the lucky few. It's a set of learnable skills that anyone can develop through deliberate practice and genuine commitment. These 10 principles work together as an interconnected system, each one reinforcing and amplifying the others. When you practice active listening, you naturally ask better open-ended questions. When you think before you speak, your words become simpler and clearer. When you maintain eye contact and align your body language, your message carries more weight and credibility. When you expand your vocabulary and read aloud daily, you express yourself with greater precision and confidence. When you record yourself and seek feedback, you identify and correct the blind spots that have been holding you back. Your path forward. So, where do you begin? Start by choosing just one principle to focus on this week. Perhaps you'll commit to putting away your phone during every conversation and practicing true active listening. Maybe you'll start asking open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions. Or you might begin recording yourself for just 5 minutes each day to build awareness of your speaking patterns. The specific starting point matters less than the decision to start. To take one concrete action today that moves you toward better communication. Over the next 90 days, work through each principle systematically, spending roughly a week or two on each one until it begins to feel more natural. Keep a simple journal tracking your progress, noting which principles feel easy and which require more effort. Celebrating small wins like getting through a meeting without interrupting or receiving positive feedback on a presentation. This documentation serves both as motivation when progress feels slow and as evidence of how far you've come when you look back months from now. You'll encounter obstacles along the way because changing deeply ingrained habits is never easy. You'll forget to pause before speaking in heated moments. You'll catch yourself using filler words despite your best efforts. You'll have conversations where you realize afterward that you dominated the talking without really listening. These moments aren't failures. They're part of the learning process, opportunities to notice your patterns and recommit to improvement without harsh self-judgment. The ripple effects of improving your communication extend far beyond just having better conversations. As you become a more effective communicator, you'll notice that opportunities start opening up that were previously closed. People will seek your input on important decisions because they trust you to listen and provide thoughtful perspectives. Your ideas will gain traction because you can articulate them clearly and persuasively. Your relationships will deepen because people feel genuinely heard and understood in your presence. Your confidence will grow as you stop replaying conversations in your mind, wishing you'd said things differently. Remember that communication is not about perfection or becoming someone you're not. It's about removing the barriers between your authentic self and how you're perceived by others. About ensuring that the valuable insights, genuine care, and unique perspectives you have inside actually make it across to the people around you. You already have worthwhile things to say. Now you have the tools to say them in ways that create real impact and genuine connection. Your voice matters. Your ideas deserve to be heard. And your ability to connect with others is one of the most powerful assets you possess. The question isn't whether you can become a better communicator. The research and the experiences of millions of people prove that you absolutely can. The only question is whether you're willing to put in the practice, face the discomfort of growth, and commit to the journey of continuous improvement. So take what you've learned in these pages and put it into action today. Start one conversation with full presence and genuine curiosity. Ask one open-ended question that invites real sharing. Pause one extra second before responding in a difficult moment. These small acts are the building blocks of transformation, and your communication journey begins right now with the very next words you speak. This concludes our journey today. Thank you for listening. If you found value in this, please leave a like. It really helps the channel. I'd also love to hear your favorite takeaway in the comments below. Subscribe for more audiobooks, and I'll see you in the next one.